You're a high-end, top-level candidate in cybersecurity and tech, and you're getting rejected and ghosted. And it's not about your skills and experience.
What?
Today I'm going to walk through the job seeking funnel from start to finish. And there's a lot of little things that people miss out that is stopping them getting that dream job. The job seeking funnel is quite a long process that has many different steps in it. We start off with resume creation. I did a video recently on which I called Riffing on Resumes, which is all about how to get your resume ready. From there, we'll talk about LinkedIn online presence. We'll look at applications and the outreach, screening and interviews. And then obviously, if everything goes well with your interviews and your screening and your vetting process, we'll talk about offers and negotiation. After that, we'll cover onboarding and your first month. The first month is critical when you start that new job. It's where you're going to set precedents, where you're going to show people where you might let them down and where you're going to excel and where the value add is. And it's going to be a confirmation of what they saw in the interviews, the value proposition they saw, and how you're delivering on that promise. Lastly, we'll talk about the probation period, whether that's 3, 6 months. We'll go through that and some things you need to be aware of. So most people only focus on certain segments of this process. Today, we'll try and do an in-depth guide in looking at each of these stages, what might be going wrong, what is a red flag, and how best we can solve that. We're going to look at each stage, look at the red flags, consider the hiring process and what that segment in the process does, how it reflects, and how it might be affecting your candidacy. All right, so to get stuck in, firstly, we're going to talk about resumes and resume creation. We're not going to go into too much detail here. As I said before, I have a video called Riffing on Resumes, which is about an hour-long video, me driving to pick up my daughter and talking through the various things that someone needs to remember when doing a resume. At the end of the video, I'll drop a link to a Google Doc, which is a checklist on how you can make sure your resume is ready. That checklist is based on a 20-page document I've been putting together, which is an in-depth guide on how to get your resume job ready. I think I'm talking too much about resumes. I've done a video about that. So the first thing, which is a rehash on the previous, is you typically want to check, open, and review your resume every 3 months. You always want to ensure that your resume is ready to pursue a job. You now have job security, job safety, you're quite comfortable, maybe even working for the same company for a few years. You never know when a layoff or a restructuring might happen. You want to get ahead of your peers and have that resume ready to rock as soon as that moment happens. As I've said before, you can imagine in having to prepare a resume from scratch in that moment of doubt and concern when you've been laid off. So best thing is check it every 3 months and make sure it's up to date. Add anything that's new, add any certifications you've done recently, and maybe take away some of the fluff that might not be adding value to your candidacy. Once again, rehashing the past, we typically want 3 resumes. We want a 3, a 2, and a 1-pager. The 3 pages is the very long and in-depth resume. I'll tell you where to use that one. When you're applying for a job via an applicant tracking system like Greenhouse or Lever, or what I use, Recruit CRM, you typically want to use a good, concise, and to the point 2-page resume. And then on top of this, you want a 1-pager. Your 1-page you'll use if a buddy contacts you and says, hey, heard there's layoffs. I'd love to have a quick look at your resume. It's something you can send via WhatsApp or via a LinkedIn message. It's a very short, brief, to the point resume, which is mainly just highlights. Your 2 pages are going to have a lot more breathing room. That's where you're going to add a bit more information and especially context in the work that you've done. The 3-pager is something you can typically offer. If you've applied for a job and a company comes back to you with some questions, that's where you can use your 3-pager. You can offer it and say, hey, I've obviously sent you my 2-pager. I do have a 3-page, more long and in-depth resume if you'd like it. The easiest way to go about this is honestly start long and make it shorter. I have found it's much easier to have a long resume and make it shorter than a short one and make it longer. All right, so let's talk about some of the red flags. One of the key components I look at when it comes to a cybersecurity position is your resume structure, your spelling, and your grammar. Unfortunately, I've got to a point where I myself make spelling and grammar errors often, but I'm able to spot them very quickly in a resume. Now, as we know, in cybersecurity, especially in something like offensive security and pen testing, a report is the critical component of that. So yes, you would do an engagement for 5 or 10 or 20 days, and the end result of that is a report, a debrief session, and a remediation session. If your resume is not structured well, you have spelling, grammatical errors, different fonts, and it's a bit of a mess, it is going to be a reflection of how you might do report writing. So that is a critical component. Always make sure you do spelling and grammar. Your resume on the first half of page 1 needs to be hard-hitting, and it needs to be enough to get that person's attention to say, hey, you have this job, you have this requirement, I have what you're looking for. Another small thing, we won't go into too much detail about PII, but ensure you have an email address at minimum, a rough location of where you're at, and make sure the recruiter can understand in that first page what you can do. Another red flag when it comes to resumes is when your skills are buried in a bunch of narrative. Often a lot of people will use paragraphs, and the key components of what they need is hiding in there. It needs to be clearly legible, it needs to be concise, it needs to be uniformity across the document, and your skills need to stand out there. And your skills in the context of the job you've done is the critical component. Another weird thing that I found about resumes, and it's not necessarily something that would make me want to reject a candidate, but often when people aren't paying attention, they might have a 2-page resume, but when they apply, the document suddenly becomes a 3-pager. That's why it's always best to use a PDF to apply for a job. You'll find that sometimes in Word, it'll add a 3rd page that is completely blank, and then it starts making me ask questions. So be mindful of that. Next thing we want to look at is your LinkedIn and your online presence. So as I mentioned before, typically when I get a resume, everything looks good. I will often open that person's LinkedIn profile because it's a standardized structure of career profile. A LinkedIn is a lot like your public proof of work or your social proof. It might have recommendations from people you've worked for before. It'll have your skills, which often is just a way for a search, a Boolean string search to pick up your profile related to a job. But your LinkedIn profile can make a big difference. With your LinkedIn profile, you can typically go into a lot more detail than you might in your resume. What you don't want to do is break the uniformity you've had in your resume. So do you necessarily want your resume to duplicate your LinkedIn and vice versa? In some ways, yes, but don't just copy paste things. It then becomes more irrelevant. So add more detail onto your LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, it is always a bit of a red flag when I don't see a picture, a nice clear picture. And often your picture won't be enough to get you a job, but it definitely is a metric that can make me not want to consider you. If you have a ridiculous picture, that's going to stand in your way. A critical red flag when it comes to LinkedIn profiles is make sure the dates on your LinkedIn for the various bits of work and experience you have match to your resume. If your LinkedIn dates and your resume dates don't sync up, it's a red flag for me. The issue with that is the first conversation I would have with you is query that and ask why your LinkedIn dates aren't matching your resume. Now, I've had it before where candidates try to explain that, and then it often makes me think that they are misleading me. Just make sure the dates match up, and that way that conversation doesn't have to happen. Another useful tip when it comes to LinkedIn is if you've worked for a brand that has a LinkedIn page, make sure when you add them in your experience, you tag them in that post. Often myself and other recruiters, if we know that candidates from a specific company works well for our client, we will go to the company's page, we will look at who works there, and we'll work to those people to see if any of them fit. By linking yourself and tagging yourself to that company, it helps you stand out as well from a brand perspective. Now, some people in cybersecurity don't like using security. Some people in security don't like using LinkedIn. My suggestion is, if indeed you're looking for a job, Have a good, solid, in detail LinkedIn profile. You don't have to give away all the information, but have something there that is searchable and findable. Nothing stops you opening up your LinkedIn, setting it up, getting everything good to go, and then when you get a job, basically making it private. By having the ability to turn it on and off, that means you can control the narrative and you can control when you are found or not. You just might get offered a dream opportunity via LinkedIn. Another key tip with your LinkedIn is you can actually edit your public URL. You go to settings and I believe privacy or preferences, edit public profile, and in there at the top right, you can actually change your URL. Typically your URL will be your first name, last name, and then a list of numbers. You can edit that to something more concise, but don't do something silly. If you fit about 60% of a job, and maybe you have some other skills that you think might be of value to this job, then definitely apply. If you do not fit a job at all, I strongly suggest not applying. Another pro tip for this is nothing stops you applying for a job, finding the hiring manager via LinkedIn and dropping them a message. You can send them a connection request and add a note, say, hey, I saw your job for X, I just dropped my application, look forward to hearing more about it. Maybe don't expect to get a response, but when I get one of those things, I will have a closer look at your application to make sure it's fitting. Now, a red flag, without stating the obvious, is if, say for example, you find a CISO or CTO level job. If you yourself are a welder or a truck driver, which are very respectable professions, and I know they pay well, I don't understand why people do this. I think it's great to overreach or overextend your experience and skill set, but the chance of a truck driver going from being a truck driver to a CISO is zero, not even 0.1%. There is zero chance. And nothing stops a truck driver doing some certs, getting into the industry, and over 5 to 10 years becoming a CISO. But when you apply for a job you clearly do not fit, you need to expect to be rejected. Now, a question you might have is, when do I know to apply for a certain job? If you fit about 60% of a job, and maybe you have some other skills that you think might be of value to this job, then definitely apply. If you do not fit a job at all, I strongly suggest not applying. Now, when applying for a job, some people might say you need to get out hundreds of applications. This unfortunately has become a big part of the in recent time, this has become a bigger thing. The industry, or the portion of the industry that is hiring, is a lot more discerning, because at the moment it's a hiring market as opposed to a candidates market that it was years before. Meaning that the companies that are hiring have a lot more applications that fit for the finite amount of jobs that they have. In the candidates market, there is endless jobs and minimal talent pool. You need to get this right. I typically suggest don't apply to more than 10 jobs in a day. Take your time with each job, message the hiring manager or drop them an email. Don't badger them, but put more effort into those 10 applications than you do hundreds. Another critical tip there, which I've seen a lot of people use, I don't know what they use, but they use this thing that it's got it's like a wave, and it's like, applied for 100 jobs, led to this many first interviews, this many second interviews. The long and short of that is, maybe start a Google Doc or a Google Sheet and track each application you've done and see where it goes. It might help you when you get a random call one day when someone says, hey, I saw you applied for the job at such and such. I just want to have a quick chat with you. I personally will never cold call someone like that, but at least then you can quickly pull up your sheet, identify the job when you applied for it, and have the context of it. I hope this is recording. Now, when you apply for a job and get rejected, I typically like to give people feedback on why they were rejected, even on application. If your profile was completely out of the park for this role, I typically won't provide feedback. But if you were close, I will typically send you you'll get an automated email saying you were rejected on the application. And then I would follow that up with a bit of feedback. If you really, really want feedback, just ask the recruiter and say, hey, can I get 2 bullet points on why maybe I didn't fit this role? Only do that when you felt you fitted 65 to 75% of this job. Now, if I or any other recruiter gives you feedback, if you have questions about it, feel free to ask, but try not to judge the recruiter for rejecting you. They know what works for their client. They have a deep level connection with that client. They know what works for them and what doesn't. So it typically is a frustration for me when people fight me on that feedback. We've taken the time to give you feedback. Do with that what you will. All right, let's see. Next, we're going to talk about screening and interviews. So if you go through a recruiter, you would typically do a call with the recruiter. If they're happy with your skill set and profile, they'll probably brief you on the position during that first call. They'll tell you the process and the steps that come after that. They will furnish you with as much information as they have. They do not always have all the answers, but they will give you what they can. From there, a recruiter will typically take your resume. They'll write a brief proposal on yourself, and they will submit that to the client, whether that is via email, whether they have internal access to their company's applicant tracking system, or they have a third-party greenhouse link to submit candidates. Now, different recruiters have different levels of influence and deep-seated networks within the clients, and sometimes we simply do not get feedback from the client. That unfortunately means that we can't give you any feedback. But let's say that process has happened, or you've applied for a job directly, and you applied for that job, whether through the recruiter or through another applicant tracking system or a job you found online, and they reach out and they say, hey, we like what we see, we'd like to schedule an interview. Bear in mind that sometimes these notifications might be automated using tags that reference different information on the applicant tracking system, like your name, your surname, your phone number. Sometimes we get this wrong. Just like you can make mistakes, so can we. So maybe don't judge too harshly. Now, what you need to do, and one of the biggest red flags we have, is you are now preparing for that interview. And what you fail to do is do your research. Now, am I telling you to spend a week researching this company that you are able to write a dissertation on? No. But any time spent in preparation can save you in the long run. I remember my first job out the army, I went for an interview with a maritime security company called Mast. I'd researched every single thing about that company. And when I sat down for an interview with a board of 6 people, I could tell each of them what their names were, what they did, how long they'd been with Mast, what their job title was, where they studied, and what they do in their spare time. This is actually where I found LinkedIn. Now, do you need to go into that level? No, I don't think so. But make sure you understand what the company does, because I can guarantee you on that first interview, they will ask you the question, so what do you know about us? And if you are interviewing with a pen test consultancy and they ask you that question and you go, oh, you're a pen test consultancy, it is going to be extremely detrimental to your candidacy in that process. If you haven't done the research, I can almost guarantee you will reject it on the spot. Or that interview will carry on, and at the end of it, that board will discuss it and say, you know what, this person doesn't care. They're not interested in working here. I've had candidates interview with companies like Things Applied Research, and when they got on the call, they said, oh, you're a security company. You can have the best profile on earth. If you do not show that company that you put the effort in, don't be upset when you don't get selected. All right, next thing, dress code. Typically these days in tech and security and other sort of online orientated jobs, most of your interviews will be done virtually, whether that via Zoom, Google Meet, Skype, which doesn't exist anymore, or Teams. Make sure you are prepared for it. Make sure that you maybe join a meeting on the same system that they used before to ensure you don't have an odd name, which is a massive red flag. I think we've all seen the video of the person that attended court and they had quite a sexual derogatory handle on their Zoom from someone that had used their Zoom before. So make sure that is all clearly set up. Make sure your background is neat. Now, typically I would suggest use your own background that you maybe created on Canva, or blur your background. If you have a nice setup behind you, let everyone see that. If you're doing this interview in a messy room, you need to do something about that. Either clean the room and make sure it is orderly, because that is going to be another unconscious bias that someone's going to have to judge you on. Another critical component of this is if you're doing an interview on a phone, which is perfectly fine, set up the phone on something that is stable. Set it up on a stand, set it up on a desk. There's nothing worse for me sitting at my table with my PC that is static, and this person is walking and moving around and driving. Unless you're having a quick call, quick catch up with someone, do not do this. Get a nice setup, use your laptop, use your phone, put it on something static, and do the interview that way. I, in my life, have done interviews with people, and when they join the call, they're literally under a duvet, getting up first thing in the morning. Fair to say that was an immediate rejection for myself. Another critical component, and often this is hard to get right, is dress code. How do you dress for a Zoom meeting? I typically don't mind if someone wears a t-shirt, but I need them to look they need to look neat and presentable to some extent. On a rare occasion, I will get someone that will wear a collared shirt and a tie. As long as you look neat and presentable, that works. But on that note, I don't think I'm correctly dressed. 1 second. All right. I think that's better. If I understand correctly, the Springboks are playing the Barbarians this morning. Earlier, my wife said, "You don't care about rugby, who are we playing?" And I said, "We're playing the British Lions, of course." But I was clearly wrong. All right, let's talk about the next red flag, is arriving on time. We all know life happens and sometimes things get in the way. If you're going to be late for a meeting, do advise the company you're going to be late. If you get another opportunity with them, ensure you are on time, if not early. As we used to say in the military, if you can't be on time, be 5 minutes early. It's happened to me before, where a candidate was scheduled an interview, they miss it for whatever reason. I say, no problem, we schedule another one, they miss that one, and then the third one, they rock up late. I typically won't wait in a call for longer than 10 minutes. I will notify you 5 minutes in that I'm waiting for you. And if you don't show up, it typically isn't problematic, but if you do it consistently, it shows a trend. We have to remember that how resumes could reflect how you do documentation. Interviews will show how you work with customers. Imagine I record off this thing and the phone's dead. All right, the next thing we need to tackle is asking questions. Throughout every interview you do with a company, however many there might be, they will always typically give you an opportunity to ask questions. Now, there's two reasons for this. One is, if there's typically information you're looking for, this is an opportunity for you to get that information that you require to consider this job. But what it also is, which a lot of people forget about, is an opportunity to highlight something about yourself. So you might ask a question that, let's say you're a manager or you were looking for a management level position. You would ask a question that typically a manager would ask, saying, how does the board or how does the company deal with this, and this from a management perspective? And when they give an answer, you can also add your own insights to that. It is a huge opportunity for you. Also, asking questions about the company's culture, how the day-to-day works, almost asking questions as if you are working there, to help them understand or help them feel what it might be like to work with you. It's a huge opportunity. If they come to the end of their interview and they ask you, so Charles, any questions for us? And you just say, no, nothing, thanks. It doesn't bite well. So use that opportunity. The company wants you to ask something, typically, and it's also a huge opportunity for you to highlight something about yourself. Now, we need to talk about confidence and arrogance. It is crucially important to be as confident as you can in an interview. It is important not to be distracted during that interview, which is something I have seen a lot, where I know for a fact that person is doing other work while doing the call with me. Take the 30 minutes, focus on the interview before you carry on with your day. Now, being confident is critically important. If you're shy and introverted, like many people are, and I've interviewed a lot of people like that, especially people that are neurodiverse, such as myself, it's okay to be a bit more shy and introverted. But what you don't want to create is a situation where the interviewer feels like they are extracting blood from stone. We all often struggle with social cues. So when a question is asked, answer it as detailed as you can, and be mindful of the interviewer and the social cues they might give you to complete what you're saying. Now, if you provide too much information, unfortunately, that can also count against you, because it shows that you're not capable of communicating a complex problem in a finite amount of time. So what you might pick up is the interviewer will start nodding and go, yes, yes, okay. When they start saying those kind of things, think about wrapping up your phrase. And what you could do is you could finish up and just say, does that answer your question, or would you like me to go into further detail? If you don't understand the question, make sure you ask for clarification. If it is a very broad question, nothing stops you asking for more specificity or circumstances related to the question. Now, it is important to be confident, but it is very damaging to be arrogant. I find that certain high-level positions, C-level positions, a lot of sales-related positions, I get a lot of arrogance. I myself cannot represent an arrogant candidate. It's a recipe for disaster, and it's one of those, I think it's called a perfect jerk. So someone that is exceptionally good at their job, but they're not a good person to work with, and they're a little bit toxic. It's important to be confident, but arrogance is going to kill the vibe. Now, how can you be confident in something you don't know? Now, this is a massive red flag in an interview. When you do an interview with a company, that company will have your resume. Hopefully they've looked into you a little bit. They've looked at your LinkedIn. Maybe they've done previous interviews. They will be able to identify something you do not know. And what some companies might do is they might ask you a question to something they know you don't know. Now, should you fake it till you make it or try wing it? Definitely not. My suggestion is, I always say, have confidence in what you know, but have the equal amount of confidence in that which you don't. So when you ask a question about something you have no idea about, try and figure out what the direction of the question is, and then say, hey, honestly, I don't know anything about this. However, this is how I would go about finding the answer. You know, you could say you would go do your own research using these resources. From there, you would try develop an opinion on it. You would maybe speak to your colleagues to see if they've had the same problem and see how they've solved it. And if you don't come right there, you can speak to your boss or your manager to get more direction on this. The company is doing that to see how well you can solve a problem, especially in something you don't know. As I know, most hackers, we deal with a lot of problems we've never seen before, and we always find a way to figure it out. Now, having confidence to say, you know what, I don't know how this thing works, but this is how I go about getting the answer, and this is my vague familiarity with it, is going to go a long way. Be careful if someone asks you a question you don't know, you're giving a half-baked answer, and when they drill deeper into that, because you are not able to answer that with confidence, you tank. I've caught people, unfortunately, where I ask them something specific like, okay, DNS, can you tell me how DNS works? Which is a super broad thing. And they go, yes, I understand DNS, I've done networking, I understand it fully, and I ask them to explain it. And then you can see the cogs in their mind are starting to roll, and now they realize they've just stated they're an expert in this thing, and now they can't explain how it works. Now, do I need the most extremely technical answer for that? No. I am trying to assess how confident you can answer that question and if it aligns with my understanding about that subject. So rather, say that you don't know and explain how you would get the answer. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is offers and negotiations. You have completed all the interviews and we're getting to the fun part. Offers and negotiation. Let's tackle it. You've prepared your resume, you've sorted out your LinkedIn presence, you've applied for the job, you've done the interviews, and now we get into the fun and often tricky part. Offers and negotiation. Let's get into it. I should make a checklist just on this. So you've gone through your interviews and you either hear from the company or you hear from your recruiter that they're looking to extend an offer. This is typically where a recruiter can be super, super useful and helpful. So if you're using a recruiter, use this to your advantage. Now, typically, my clients will advise me when they are considering or looking to make an offer to a candidate. Obviously, I get excited for a brief moment and then I come back to reality and I figure out the best way to go about this. I will typically advise my clients which way to go about it. If it's a long-standing client and I often feel that they are best in delivering an offer, I will get them to make the offer direct to you. They will set up a call with you. They'll go through a few things, a bit of feedback, and then they'll extend the offer. Sometimes I'll ask the client to send me the offer. I'll review it to make sure the numbers match what you're looking for, if not as close to it as possible. I will do what's something called a pre-close. So I will pre-close you on the position. Once that is done, I can advise the client. I say, hey, Christopher is happy with the offer as it stands. You should go ahead and send it. That way, when the client sends it, the candidate gets it, they review the document, they sign it, they return it. Now, a massive, massive red flag that happens in this process is if in the beginning, when you were interviewed by a recruiter or you were interviewed by the first company and they started getting into the numbers and you told them, let's say you were looking for $85,000. Now, it is perfectly fine if you go through, let's say, 3 interviews and then you're realizing that this job is a lot more than you expected. It's going to require a lot more time and resources from you, and the price point you discussed with them is significantly lower than what this job might require, which does happen. Now, there's ways to communicate this with your recruiter and with the client. If you're working with a recruiter, I think keep open lines of communication with your recruiter and advise them on this. It typically works very well when someone comes to me with this information and I'll go back to the customer and say, hey, I need to do a quick call, and we discuss it and we deal with it straight there. It is not going to go well if you get an offer of 85 and your response to that is, yeah, I thought about this and I actually want 95 or I want $100,000. Even though your request might be justified, it is going to down like a steamy pile of you-know-what on a freight train falling out the sky. There is better ways to communicate this. ChatGPT can be very useful for that, or get some advice from someone else. If you're establishing that the money you said you're looking for versus the money you think this job needs after many interviews, you need to communicate that as early as possible in the most decent and respectful way possible. Maybe hop on a call with the hiring manager or the HR rep that you're working with and just say, hey, when I started interviewing for this job, X, Y, and Z, now I understand it as A, B, C. For that reason, I think I need to adjust my asking price to this. Also, if you're interviewing with other companies that we know are paying well, you can advise us on that, because using another offer to leverage your existing offer, although it can be risky, is viable. If you have a skill that the company is looking for, they are going to pay the money and make it happen. But you need to do this in a smart way. The next big red flag is a counter. Now, I've dealt with counters in the past. I typically don't like them. And it's typically better for me if I can warn the client about a potential counter situation. Now, if you're pursuing a job purely to get a counter out of your existing employer, maybe don't work with me. But if it's someone I know well, that's something I might look at and work on. But if you start getting into a counter war, i.e., you're interviewing with, I'm drinking a Bon Aqua here, you're interviewing with Bon Aqua. Bon Aqua makes you an offer of R1 million. You then, in the same time, get an offer from Views. You go back to Bon Aqua and say, hey, Views made me an offer of 1.2. What do you want to do about it? Now, Bon Aqua might go there and say, okay, we can offer you 1.25 or 1.3. If you now go back to Views and say, right, Bon Aqua offered me 1.3, what are you going to do about it? I can almost guarantee, unless these people are desperate for you, Views will reject you, Bon Aqua will reject you, and you're left in a position where you have no offers. So tread very carefully and don't go through a counter cycle more than once. It is a huge recipe for disaster. And what you might find in the future is, if you're interviewing with Bonacqua and Views, they will probably not consider you again for a long time. They call that a cool down period. Some companies have a 5-year cool down period. If you've messed up on the culture side, if something went horribly wrong, or you started a counter war, they will not touch you. Another obvious red flag that happens with these things is if you get an offer and you accept it, next you're going to get a contract. Now, sometimes the contract doesn't work for you and you can reject it. But if you accept an offer and you were interviewing elsewhere and you didn't advise your recruiter or the client, and suddenly this other offer comes in and it is far beyond the initial offer you got from this other company, if you now jump ship, it is going to look super bad. What I typically like to do is, if I've got a candidate interviewing with multiple companies at the same time, I will try to synchronize the processes so the offers come at the same time. I will advise the client that you are interviewing at multiple companies. That way we can get the offers at roughly the same time, and the candidate has 2 or 3 points of comparison, if they're interviewing at 2 or 3 different companies. I will try and get an offer that's got a bit more of a latency period. Like, some offers literally last 24 hours. Some companies are happy to give you 6 to 10 days to consider it. If you accept an offer, get another offer you like from another company, accept that, drop the first one. Nothing's to say that that second offer is going to pan out. Now, this is still forgivable. There's nothing worse than someone accepting an offer, accepting a contract, signing a contract, setting up a start date, getting their laptop, and not showing up on the first day for some silly reason. I've had it before where someone signed their offer, signed their contract, got a start date, got their swag, got their laptop, and the day before they started, they accepted a job elsewhere and they didn't inform me or the client. It totally destroys the relationship I have with my client, unless it's a long, trusted client. And it reflects badly on everyone. And you'll most likely go on a DNC list, a do not communicate list, from the recruiter and the client, respectively. So don't be that person. What else are we going to talk about? Now, if you get an offer that doesn't sit well with you, there's a few ways you can go about it. Always be decent, always be respectful, and it's okay if you go to a company and say, hey, I was really expecting this much. It seems you've offered me this much. Unfortunately for me, that is not a viable career move for me. If you deal with that offer that you didn't like in a decent, respectful manner, it means that door is always open. And chances are, if you decide to pursue that company in the future, if it isn't too long from when you got that offer, you can probably skip most interviews and go straight to an offer stage. If you ruin it in that situation, don't be asking questions when that company refuses to interview you. It is so important that you get this interview cycle right. Now, when it comes to negotiating your number, we've mentioned that if the number adjusts while the interview's gone, that is fine and manageable. It's important to understand that a lot of times the number that you get from a company will be determined by sort of what you earned previously. Now, let's say you were on $100,000 and you worked for a company for 2 years, and then you interviewed and got an offer from a company. You want 100, now they're offering you 120. That is a decent move. Now, if you were on $100,000 and you suddenly said to a company, I want $150,000, unless you achieved amazing things in that company, you had long tenure with that company, because we all know compensation tends to stagnate the longer you are with a company. There's a bit of like a parabola, anything over sort of 3 to 4 years. So if you're looking for a big pay jump, you need to be able to justify that. And you also need to remember is you need to deliver at that level. Now, I've got enough experience to know that certain companies pay better than others. And I can tell if you're underpaid by industry standards and underpaid by that company's standards. I have negotiated people to get literally 100% increase because they worked for a company that undervalued them, underpaid them, and it was just a mess. But you need to make sure you have something that can stand behind that number you're asking for. And most important, If you're looking for a pay jump to, let's say, $200,000, you need to make sure you can deliver at that price point multiplied by 3. No company hires you to provide one-to-one value. You typically need to provide 4 to 5 times value for that company determined by your price point. Now, sometimes when it comes to talking about numbers, people ask me, Charles, what do I do? I typically suggest when you're working with a recruiter you think understands your skill set, and has your best interests at heart, within reason, of course, I typically tell them to talk about the numbers. Bearing in mind, most recruiters are paid a percentage measure of your first year's salary, excluding benefits. So the more you get paid, the more us recruiters will get paid. So it is in our best interest to get you the highest number possible. Now, I typically don't gouge out the price. I try and find a happy medium where the client thinks they got it maybe a bit of a bargain, and the candidate gets a bit more than they were expecting. That is something I do. Now, working with your recruiter helps manage these things. All right, next up, we need to talk about onboarding and your first month at the company, which is crucial. Now, there's some things companies can do which are red flags, and that typically is when you feel the job you interviewed for is not matching up to the job you're actually doing. Or the worst is when you interview for a job you thought you wanted, let's say it was a SOC engineer, and when you get there, you're not doing SOC engineering stuff. Now, that is a red flag. Make sure if you worked with a recruiter, you communicate with them so they're aware of what's going on. Now, on the other side, when you start with a job, every job I've worked in as a contractor back in the day, I made sure I made myself valuable and useful. If I didn't have anything to do, I would find something to do. If I felt I wasn't adding enough value, I would tell my manager, which maybe isn't the best thing to do, but I would find things to do to add value to that company. The first month you work at a company is critical. So make sure you work hard and knock it out the park. If you can get, most companies will know if they've made a good decision on you within the first 2 weeks. If a company takes 3 months to realize you're not the fit they were looking for, I typically think that's on the clients, on the fault of the company, not the candidate. But make sure you maintain open communication with the recruiter you worked with. Try in your first month not be a problematic person. Maybe in this day and age, that's the wrong thing to say, but I typically, when I start on contracts, I would typically have opinions on almost nothing related to anything outside of the job. I would shut up, I would do my job and get on with it. Now, the value proposition and the difference you can make in the company in that first month is critical, and that will hold you out for however many years you work at that company. Now, if you maybe mess up in the beginning, there's ways to correct that. You know, if you struggle with report writing, maybe tell your manager, look, I seem to be not doing well in the report writing. Could we maybe get me on like a writing class or something like that? Work with your managers, work with your peer in order to learn. I typically, when I worked on a contract, the first few days, I wouldn't really make friends. I would just try to get the lay of the land, find out who's who solves the problems, who is a problem, who to avoid, you know, who's a target for the bosses. And I would formulate that, and from there, I would execute how I do my work. So keep that in mind. Now, a probationary period can be a complex situation. If you join that company, and like I said before, you add the value that they were looking for, and everything goes well through a probation period, you'll typically become a permanent employee. In South Africa, you can do, I believe, 2 fixed-term contracts, whether that is 6 months and 3 months, 3 months and 6 months, and then you become a permanent employee. You have to keep things cool in that probationary period. Now, what you don't want to do is grind for that probationary period, and once you get a full-time job, the problems start. I've seen it before. It's rare, but it does happen. But you want to make sure you execute during that probationary period. It's also important to remember that probationary period is for the company to see if you can do the thing you said you can do, but it's also for you to see whether this company is the right fit for you long term. Now, if it doesn't work out, communicate that with your recruiter, communicate that with your potential manager, and do your utmost to not burn bridges. I've seen some people that completely smite and burn a bridge. And when they've got out of that, you know, maybe they were in a bad mental state, They get out of it and they're taking some time to think and they gain perspective and they realize, damn, I ruined a good thing here. It is going to be nigh on impossible for you to get an opportunity at that company ever again. So make sure, if indeed you do leave on good terms. I also suggest, if you're in a really bad situation in the company, don't stick around. Once again, if you worked with a recruiter, communicate that effectively to them. If these tips are valuable, useful to you, please do subscribe to my channel and give it a like. If you have any questions, queries, or concerns, drop a comment in the section below and share this with a friend. I'm hoping to do this more and more and create some free downloadables for people to check out. As an example, at the moment, I believe in the description below, I will add a resume checklist, and based on this video, I'll make a checklist of the pipeline and how you go through the process, things to remember, things to be aware of. You can download that. In the future, I'll probably build on my resume checklist or my resume guide, which I'll then offer to people for a marginal price. It's taken a lot of time and effort to put in, not ChatGPT. And that way I can add value to you guys. If you're looking for more insight or information, I posted a video before on where the community comes into jobs in cybersecurity. And before that, I have a video all about talking about resumes while I was driving on a long road. So do check it out. I just want to say thank you for the support so far. It's been fantastic. I think I'm up to 30 subscribers now, which is great. I'm curious and interested to see where it goes. I'll continue doing this and getting better at it with time. My goal right now is literally to get 5 videos out of a reasonable quality. From there, we can look at better things. I think that's it. I think I waffled a lot. I'm going to record later because there's going to definitely be some stuff I forgot about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick intro first. I need to do the intro without the jersey, don't I? Alright, I'll film the introduction later.